Hi, I'm Roger Mader with Ampersand. I'm here to talk to you about creating new market space. We're going to craft a way for you to be more relevant, more often for next generation users of your product or service. You may recognize this as the Lincoln Center, the home of the New York Metropolitan Opera. In 2006, and going into the 21st century, the opera was suffering a dramatic drop-off in their subscriber base, and they turned to a number of different opera leaders in order to see if they could find a way to rejuvenate growth. They found no good answers from those who had come out of the opera. So they invited Peter Gelb to come meet with the board to offer him the possibility of being the new director of the opera. And he said, "Thank you very much. It's a great honor. You're the premier opera in the United States, one of the best in the world. However, I have no experience with the opera. What am I doing here?" And they said, "Mr. Gelb, did you not turn around Sony Classical Music?" He said, "Yes." It was a pretty dramatic undertaking. They said, "That's what we need to do here." And he said, "Okay, you need to be careful what you ask for because we're going to have to make some hard decisions. But first, let me understand the nature of the problem. How old is your subscriber base today?" They checked the numbers, came back about 78 years old, which is scary. Scarier still, he asked, what was the average age 10 years ago? Flipped through the numbers, did the math, 68. Gelb recognized that they were on a precipitous downward path, that if they didn't change quickly, they would continue to fall off that cliff ever faster. And of course, the board understood that they only had a short window of time to transform. He did what any proper executive would do when they're coming in from outside in a time of crisis. He looked at the status quo to see what do we have today. And what he found was, as you would expect from many operas, a cast of brilliant, virtuoso performers who were beautifully staged with amazing costumery and largely static, standing still, singing about action, not actually performing action. He said, what do our target audience look for with live musical performance? And among the factors were a vivid live performance, soaring music, a thematic storyline, thrilling staging, exotic exotic costumes, and dramatic narrative. Now, those are things that could be rated on a scale from boring to captivating. And when he went through his own rating system with conversations with subscribers and target customers, he came to this conclusion, that this is where the opera stands today, which is not very appealing. The soaring music and star performers ends up being the sole attraction for an increasingly aging population, without new stars coming to the forefront that are drawing enough traffic in order to renew growth. And then he found this. What he saw was Cirque du Soleil. What you just witnessed was not a demonstration of Cirque du Soleil, it was a recruiting video. It was behind the scenes. What you need to know if you're interested in joining this performing arts group, that if you haven't seen a Cirque du Soleil performance, you wouldn't imagine that it began as a group of street performers in Quebec, in Montreal, 15 years earlier. And they did so many of the things that opera did, but were so much more compelling, yet without star musical performers. They had, on the same rating scale, a curve that looks like this, where you'll see they rate above the opera on every factor except for the soaring music, although the music is remarkable, and now they have shows using songs and lyrics from the Beatles and other famous performers, Elton John, etc. But they were attracting a younger, cross-demographic population for multiple performances around the world. It was the largest growth category in this space. By comparing to that, what the Metropolitan Opera was able to do was create a much more compelling type of performance. In fact, Gelb came to the board and said, I want to ask you to consider this candidate, a young woman for a lead role with the opera, who was not renowned as an opera performer. And they're like, what are you talking about? And he said, well, she trained also as a gymnast. So that when we're having typically a song about a sword fight, she's actually going to be having a sword fight. And she might be on a trapeze having a sword fight. It will be incredibly engaging. He did another very important thing, as demonstrated here, that he recorded on high definition these performances and distributed them, you may have seen, in movie theaters around the world. And so as a result, he created a whole body, a whole asset class of performances on recording that could be licensed, reused, and create a longer-term lifetime value of each performance. In 1999, the Harvard Business Review posted an article by the same two authors, Professors Kim and Moborn, who ultimately translated that insight into Blue Ocean Strategy. This text, which is now standard fare among MBA students, basically is teaching the strategy of finding your market space by mapping out the current, plotting for the ideal, and then crafting your space so that you are separate from the existing set and distinct and more valuable. I'd like to thank you by telling you the few laws that, I wasn't ready to thank you, so I thought I was on my last slide. This translates into a few lessons for us. First, forecast misery. Gelb showed us the law of entropy says that every market will over time begin to diminish unless you're constantly re-evaluating and reinventing in order to meet changing needs. You need to demonstrate desirability as a priority. What I mean by that is, don't do what the opera wants, do what the market wants. You have to go out and understand the customer, understand their needs, and by going to see adjacent properties like Cirque du Soleil, the things that are attracting them, you can deconstruct the factors that are the value proposition for your offering. Speak in the buyer's language. Use business language, not design language, not the language of the opera. You need to go in and talk to the market in the market's language. So when you speak to the customer, you're talking to them about music, not about opera. When you're talking to the opera board, you're talking to them about the factors that drive subscriber growth. Prove preference. What I mean by that is, take your project, take it in a test form into the marketplace and make sure that it attracts before you start building and scaling your investment. Fifth, I want you to benchmark the best experience beyond your industry, not narrowly within the confines of opera in this case, but more broadly around musical theater and musical performances and live performance. By doing so, Gelb was able to find the factors that were attracting next generation customers. And lastly, measure against the buyer's criteria. The price point, the engagement, all the things that they prefer are the criteria, as you saw on this chart, that you need to be using to measure against your own performance. Thanks very much. Good luck crafting new market space. I'm Roger Mader with Ampersand.